Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
A key aide of Myanmar's ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested Friday, days after a coup that has sparked outrage and calls by U.S. President Joe Biden for the generals to relinquish power.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo and Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin have called for a special ASEAN foreign minister meeting to discuss the situation in Myanmar.
The United States' moral leadership
and U.S. President Joe Biden ended his U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's devastating war in Yemen and dramatically increased the welcome to refugees, ushering in a major reset in American foreign policy.
Persecution.
And pharmaceuticals giant Johnson & Johnson on Thursday submitted an application for emergency authorization of its COVID-19 vaccine with the U.S. health authorities.
First, a key aide of Myanmar's ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested days after a coup that has sparked outrage and calls by U.S. President Joe Biden for the generals to relinquish power. Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party said, though through a verified Facebook page, that party stalwart Win Tain had left Naypyidaw on Thursday afternoon and gone to Yangon. He was arrested from his daughter's house, where he was staying at midnight in Yangon, according to party press officer Ki To, adding he was being held in a Naypyidaw police station. The 79-year-old is a longtime political prisoner who has spent long stretches of time in and out for detention for campaigning against military rule. Considered Suu Kyi's right-hand man, he has long been sought out by international and domestic media for insights into what Myanmar's de facto leader is thinking. Ahead of his arrest, he had told local English-language media that the military putsch was not wise and that its leaders have taken the country in the wrong direction. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, a Yangon-based group that monitors political arrests in Myanmar, more than 130 officials and lawmakers have been detained in relation to the coup.
In a related news, U.S. President Joe Biden called on Myanmar's generals to relinquish power Thursday and demanded they free civilian leaders detained in this week's coup, as his administration said it was considering sanctions. Washington has led international condemnation of Monday's putsch, which saw democratic leaders, including Aung San Suu Kyi, detained and ignited fears that the military will drag 54 million people back to the decades of junta rule that turned Myanmar into one of Asia's most impoverished and repressive nations. Watch this.
There can be no doubt. In a democracy, force should never seek to overrule the will of the people or attempt to erase the outcome of a credible election. The Burmese military should relinquish power they have seized, release the advocates and activists and officials they have detained, lift the restrictions on telecommunications, and refrain from violence. We will work with our partners to support restoration of democracy and the rule of law and impose consequences on those responsible.
Shouts of "May dictatorship end" and the three-finger salute protest signs pop up in the streets of Myanmar's largest city, Yangon, as the young people call for civil disobedience against this week's military coup. Suu Kyi, who has not been seen in public since she was detained, won a huge landslide with her NLD, while the military's favored parties received a drubbing. International and local observers, as well as Myanmar's own election monitor, reported no major issues that might have affected the integrity of the vote. Myanmar's junta-era constitution ensures the military retains considerable influence, including a quarter of parliamentary seats and control of key ministries. But analysts say top generals feared their influence was waning and were dismayed by the enduring appeal of Suu Kyi.
Meanwhile, Indonesian President Joko Widodo and Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin have called for a special ASEAN foreign ministers meeting to discuss the situation in Myanmar. The statements were made when Prime Minister Yassin made a state visit to Indonesia. Let's listen in.
Kita minta dua Menteri Luar Negeri untuk berbicara dengan Chair ASEAN guna menjajaki dilakukannya pertemuan khusus Menteri Luar Negeri ASEAN mengenai perkembangan Myanmar. Tadi secara detail juga kami sudah berbicara dengan Bapak Perdana Menteri mengenai ini.
Seperti Indonesia, Malaysia juga memandang serius akan keadaan politik semasa di Myanmar yang merupakan satu langkah ke belakang dalam proses demokrasi di negara tersebut. Adalah dikhawatiri pergolakan politik di Myanmar boleh menjejaskan keamanan dan kestabilan di rantau ini.
Kita saksikan bersama
Leaders had bilateral talks at the presidential Merdeka Palace in Jakarta, where they also discussed about other issues, including the anti-palm oil campaign, situation in the South China Sea, and the Indonesian migrant workers in Malaysia. This was the first overseas trip by Prime Minister Yassin since he assumed office in March last year.
Meanwhile, Philippine Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin slammed the West for, quote, destroying ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi and making her the victim of the military. During a hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he said he will not join the West, which destroyed Suu Kyi and left her defenseless before the army. Let's listen in.
Reaction to that, Myanmar remains the official one. I pour scorn on the Western world for destroying Aung San Suu Kyi and making her a victim of the military because, I think I've explained it, that Myanmar is divided between the army that holds it together, the army founded by her father, the country founded by her father, and all she had as a balance to the army was her reputation as a freedom fighter and my newspaper columnist in Today, which I think was the greater honor. And then she somehow maneuvered to make herself a leading figure in Myanmar to start pushing the country towards democracy. The Rohingya problem comes up. Some idiots in my office in New York said, no, that's a problem of Myanmar. No, it's not the problem of Myanmar. That's the problem of the British, who created a subclass of subhuman Rohingya, brought them to Burma, a highly ethnically conscious country, and left them there and never gave them residence or citizenship. I have Burmese friends who are very rich, and they look at them as animals. That's the British legacy. Now comes the situation of the Rohingya. Aung San Suu Kyi had to balance the continuing tolerance of the army for her democratic moves against the racial hatred against the Rohingya. And what does the Western and those fairies, I call them fairies, in Oxford do? They tear her down. They remove her reputation. She had only the adoration of the world to stand up with against the army. They stripped her of all of that. Every step she made in the freedom of Burma, they erased, all so that they could feel well tearing her down. And what did the army realize at the end? That Aung San Suu Kyi, a woman who's done more than anyone for freedom, a woman who lost the affection of her son, who cannot forgive her because she refused to go to England to see her husband, their father, die, because she knew that if she went, she couldn't go back to her country. What did the West do? And now the army saw this woman has nothing. She has no name. She has no reputation. It's time to get her out of the way. And that's what happened. So my position is this. The army is indispensable to the unity of Myanmar. I told Aung San Suu Kyi, be careful of the West. The West destroyed Syria. The West destroyed Libya because they are hungry for oil. The West is hungry for the gas and oil of Burma. They're not interested in the freedom of Burma. They want Burma broken up into pieces so that they can prey on it. They said, the army alone can keep Burma together. Work with the army. But the army won't work with you if you don't count for it as a power in your own right. It's a two-syllable word. And Oxford tore her to pieces. And that was also the New York Times. They tore her to pieces. And so now where is she now? And where is Burmese democracy? 10 steps forward. Just for the liberals in the United States to feel good tearing down a woman, they have gone 20 steps back for Burmese democracy. That's my feeling. That's my policy. With Burma, we work with the powers around Burma to see if we can convince the great powers there, forget the United States. We talk to China. We talk to India. We say, can we go back to the status quo ante? Can we go back and put the mother of Burmese democracy back there and then resume the progress towards the freedom that you and I got at EDSA? This department will never listen to the West on this issue. Never. And in fact, most Asian countries are looking to our leadership, to my leadership, as a more nuanced approach to the Burmese problem. Because the last thing we want is to work with the countries in the West who destroyed Burmese democracy. I'm so angry because I met that woman. She worked with me as a writer. She's brilliant. And she gave everything in herself to make her people free. And the West destroyed it, all for their sissy sentiments, their human rights sentiments. When you know what? I challenge every single critic of Suu Kyi. Any one of you stand up who's ever fought up for freedom? Any of you suffered for freedom? We did, right, Risa? We did. You and I did. Those faggots, not a single one of them did. And they dared judge that woman. Well, now my job is to try to put her back. Maybe convince the powers that be. The status quo ante was working. Let's see if you can go back together. But the last thing, the last people I will listen to is a white face on this issue. And I charge all my people in the Department of Foreign Affairs. You listen to a white man, you listen to white opinion, and you're finished. I know you all want to go back to Western capitals. Well, you won't. So that's my opinion on the Burmese question. I'm really angry that they destroyed a great thing.
Meanwhile, several hundred teachers and students protested Friday at the Myanmar University against the coup that ousted de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi, while Myanmar civil servants at ministries in Naypyidaw walked out and posed with red ribbon signs in the latest display of civil disobedience against the military. Take a look.
In other news, President Joe Biden on Thursday ended U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's devastating war in Yemen and dramatically increased the welcome to refugees, ushering in a major reset in American foreign policy. Watch this.
This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales.
In his first major speech on foreign affairs as president, he appointed a U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, veteran diplomat Timothy Leonard King, who Biden said would support UN efforts to reach a ceasefire and revive peace talks between the government and Houthi rebels who control much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. Saudi Arabia reacted to Biden's speech by reasserting its commitment to a political solution in Yemen, according to state media. Riyadh also welcomed Biden's commitment to cooperate with the kingdom to defend its sovereignty and counter threats against it, the official Saudi press agency added. Trump, who argued arms sales were creating U.S. defense jobs, viewed the war as a way to hit back at the Houthis' ally, Iran.
And as mentioned in his first major speech on foreign affairs as president, Mr. Biden also froze former President Donald Trump's plans to redeploy troops from Germany, and he also vowed a tough approach against what he described as a rising authoritarian threat from China and Russia. He also dramatically increased the welcome to refugees, ushering in a major reset in his foreign policy. Take a look.
The United States' moral leadership on refugee issues was a point of bipartisan consensus for so many decades when I first got here. We shined the lamp of liberty on oppressed people. We offered safe havens for those fleeing violence or persecution. And our example pushed other nations to open wide their doors as well. So the politically motivated jailing of Alexei Navalny and the Russian efforts to suppress freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are a matter of deep concern to us and the international community. Mr. Navalny, like all Russian citizens, is entitled to his rights under the Russian Constitution. We'll confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action to push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance. But we are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so.
In other news, Europe and pharma groups must work together to speed up COVID-19 vaccinations, the head of the European branch of the World Health Organization says, expressing concern about the effectiveness of vaccines on virus variants. Watch this.
And I'm honest, I think the tunnel is a bit longer than I thought, the end of December. But there is, it's going to be manageable, more preventable. This year, this is number one, but there are four concerns. The first one, it spreads more quickly. So more people get quicker the disease, which means that the health systems which are overstretched will struggle even more. Number two, as you say, is the effectiveness of the vaccine. There are some preliminary reports that the South African variant in particularly may cause a little bit more challenges there, but we're not sure yet. But that's why we have to be very vigilant. We need to beef up the production capacity of the vaccines, and we need the government to do a very clear communication. Because I have the impression sometimes people think that we get a vaccine, everything is fine. But still, you can paradoxically get the vaccine. It prevents you of becoming sick, but you still transmit. So the narrative is very complicated. I mean, Sanofi is, for example, going to help to increase the production of Pfizer and BioNTech. That's what we need. More companies to team up together to beef up production capacity. Number one is, for example, the UK variant going to combine with the South African variant. I mean, that we don't know, right? So there are many options on the table, but the level of alertness compared with before the pandemic, I mean, is high. So I'm confident, yes.
Pressure is growing not only on wealthy nations to speed up their stuttering rollouts, but also for a more equitable allocation of precious vaccine supplies to poorer countries in a push to end a pandemic that has claimed close to 2.3 million lives. Supply shortages and diplomatic bickering have marred the vaccine rollouts in Europe, where just 2.5% of the population has received a first dose, with the production capacity at pharmaceutical plants a source of tension between the firms and EU bosses. The virus is known to have infected more than 104 million people globally. Experts have warned that vaccines will only help control its spread and end unpopular and economically painful restrictions if the whole world is covered.
Meanwhile, pharmaceuticals giant Johnson & Johnson submitted an application for emergency authorization of its COVID-19 vaccine with U.S. health authorities. The process could take several weeks, but if approved, the vaccine would be the third authorized in the U.S. after those of Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. The new vaccine is highly anticipated because it has two big logistical advantages. It can be stored at refrigerator temperatures rather than in special freezers, significantly easing distribution, and it requires just one dose. The J&J shot uses a common cold-causing adenovirus modified so it can't replicate as a vector to shuttle genetic instructions into human cells, telling them to create a protein of the coronavirus. Now, this trains the immune system to be ready for the live coronavirus. The viral vector method is also employed by the AstraZeneca and Sputnik vaccines.
Meanwhile, servicemen and women from the National Guard administer COVID-19 vaccinations from both Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna at a site located in a park and ride off of a highway in Londonderry, New Hampshire. Watch this.
So the site we're on right now was previously just a testing site, and they operated through the summer of 2020, and starting around late December 2020 and up until now, we've been vaccinating and testing from this site. So where we're located here in the back parking lot is the vaccination site, and the testing operation still happens out of the building over here. We've learned to share the site, and a lot of the vaccine recipients that are coming through are familiar with the process here because they've come through getting tested.
Yep, this is my second shot. Pulled up and treated with a lot of respect and courtesy by the National Guardsmen.
It feels good that things are moving forward. Maybe getting a little bit back to some normalcy. Obviously, there's going to be some pitfalls throughout the next couple of months for everyone getting it, and we're still going to have to wear some masks. And especially being a first responder, you're still going to be around a lot of people that still have COVID and they're getting sick. So, but it's almost liberating to have that finally.
Hold that there for a moment.
The Philippine government will be conducting a series of time and motion simulations on the deployment of COVID-19 vaccines next week in preparation for the arrival of the jabs in the country. National Policy Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer and Vaccine Czar Carlito Galvez Jr. said today. Let's listen in.
Kaya nakikita natin dito yung partnership ng private sector, partnership ng ating mga local government officials, at partnership ng ating mga medical professionals, at partnership din ng mga logistics partners natin. Napaka ng Parañaque kasi nandito po ang airport, nandito ang ating mga storage facility, at nandito rin ang magagaling natin mga doktor. I'm pretty sure na wala po tayong ma-wastage na bakuna. Sinasabi nga ni Dr. Pascurales na yung ating bakuna ay ginto. At ito po talaga ay nakita namin.
Now, Secretary Galvez also said the vaccine deployment simulation includes laying down of the coordination system from arrival of the vaccines to the airport's point of entry, going to the warehouse, and to the point of distribution. The vaccine czar cited the importance of monitoring the preparedness of the local government units to receive the coronavirus vaccines. Based on the assessment of the coordinated operations to defeat epidemic team, Galvez noted that the LGUs in Metro Manila are ready and prepared enough to receive the vaccines.
Staying here in the Philippines, all persons in a vehicle except those driving alone are now required to wear face masks regardless of whether they are in private or public transport or are living in the same household. The policy, which was previously recommended by the Department of Health, was reconsidered by the Interagency Task Force on the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases. In a joint statement on Friday, the Department of Transportation and the DOH said both government agencies would observe and enforce the wearing of face masks inside all vehicles except when the driver is traveling alone. When the driver is with passengers, it is mandatory for all individuals inside the vehicle to properly wear a face mask, regardless if they are from the same household, according to the statement. The Land Transportation Office, the Land Transportation Franchising and Regulatory Board, the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority, the Interagency Council for Traffic, Philippine National Police Highway Patrol Group, other law enforcement agencies, and local government units will coordinate for the proper implementation of this policy. In a Viber message to reporters, DOTR Assistant Secretary Goddess Hope Libiran said these agencies would discuss the fines and penalties for violators.
Meanwhile, 9 Britons could face jail in Singapore after being charged Friday with breaking coronavirus rules over a party on a yacht where revelers danced in swimwear and Santa hats. Images of the Boxing Day festivities on the vessel went viral on social media, sparking fury from Singaporeans and prompting authorities to launch an investigation. At that time, gatherings outside the home were limited to only 5 people under curbs to prevent the spread of the virus. Anyone found to have breached the rules may be fined up to 10,000 Singaporean dollars or jailed for up to 6 months or even both. Singapore Maritime Authorities last month suspended the license of the vessel chartered for the party for 30 days after their investigations found the number of passengers on board breached COVID-19 rules. The city-state, which has had a mild outbreak, reporting around 60,000 coronavirus cases and 29 deaths, has taken a tough stand against violations of virus restrictions.
The coronavirus has killed more than 2,286,170 people since the outbreak emerged in China in December 2019, according to a Johns Hopkins University tally. The countries with the most deaths are the U.S. at 450,805, followed by Brazil with 227,563 and Mexico with 161,240. The global death toll, calculated from official daily figures published by national health authorities, is an underestimate and does not include later revisions by statistics agencies.
In the United Kingdom, nightlife is on the brink of extinction, saying 80% of nightclubs would not survive another month because of restrictions, COVID restrictions. Here's Erica Celestino for the report.
British entertainment sector is on the brink of extinction. A leading industry body warned on Thursday, saying 80% of nightclubs would not survive another month because of COVID-19 closures. Citing a survey of more than 100 nightclubs, the NTIA, or Nighttime Industries Association, said 81% of venues face bankruptcy from next month without government assistance. The NTIA added 85% of companies in the sector had made redundancies because of closure during the pandemic. Nearly two-thirds, or 65% of those clubs where staff had been laid off, had been forced to let go 60% of their staff. The association representing bars, clubs, and concert venues outlined a stark future for venues, explaining many had remained completely shuttered since the start of Britain's first lockdown. Alongside conference venues and events halls, nightlife is one of the few areas that has not reopened doors in the UK since March last year. The NTIA was critical of what it characterized as the limited and hugely disproportionate amount of government aid that had been offered to nightclubs, with the exception of a furlough scheme which has benefited employees. The government has ignored the sector and failed to recognize its economic and cultural value, said NTIA Chief Executive Michael Kill. We are a world leader in electronic music and clubs and have been a breeding ground for contemporary music talent, events, and DJs for decades. Kill called on the government to offer a financial package tailored to support businesses with a roadmap for reopening. Beyond the nighttime economy, representatives of several other industries fear continued damage from COVID-19 restrictions. The Federation of Small Businesses, or FSB, estimates that at least 250,000 SMEs risk bankruptcy without further help. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak is preparing a long-awaited budget for March 3. It is expected to detail government plans to stimulate the economy after the damage inflicted by the public health crisis. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I am Erica Celestino. We live in interesting times.
Inside the dome of a Belgrade concrete fair hall, dozens of nurses in hazmat suits vaccinate young and old alike, working with an efficiency that has turned Serbia into continental Europe's fastest vaccinator. The small Balkan country has inoculated more than 450,000 of its 7 million population against COVID-19 in almost 2 weeks, a rate that exceeds all other states in Europe, apart from the United Kingdom, according to the scientific publication Our World in Data. One key difference is that most of the vials are filled with a vaccine made by Chinese pharmaceutical giant Sinopharm. Watch this.
Radimo sa Sinopharm vakcinom, svaki dan prođe oko 2000, 1500 građana. Do sada nije bilo lošeg iskustva, znači posle primljene vakcine naši građani sede u čekaonici, budu od 15 do 30 minuta. Nekih neželjenih reakcija zaista nije bilo do sada.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by CanRiv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. Former President Donald Trump refused to testify in his looming impeachment trial after being called by House prosecutors to give evidence, branding the process unconstitutional. Trump's lawyers ridiculed the request in a letter by lead House prosecutor Jamie Raskin to answer questions over the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol as a public relations stunt. Your letter only confirms what is known to everyone. You cannot prove your allegations against Trump, attorneys Bruce Castor and David Schoen said in their reply. While the attorneys did not say whether he would testify, a senior advisor to Trump, Jason Miller, said flatly that he would not. The president will not testify in an, quote, unconstitutional proceeding, Miller told AFP. The refusal came 5 days before the trial of the former U.S. leader on one charge of incitement to insurrection opens in the U.S. Senate.
Staying in the U.S., the Democratic-led U.S. House voted Thursday to discipline a congresswoman who embraced QAnon conspiracy theories and endorsed violence, capping weeks of mounting turmoil over holding to account a lawmaker whose extremist rhetoric caused a rupture in Republican ranks. Conservative first-term Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, facing bipartisan opprobrium for a series of disturbing comments and support of social media posts advocating the assassination of Democratic lawmakers, was stripped of her 2 assignments on the House Education and Budget Committees. Watch this.
The problem with that is, though, is I was allowed to believe things that weren't true, and I would ask questions about them and talk about them. And that is absolutely what I regret. Because if it weren't for the Facebook post and comments that I liked in 2018, I wouldn't be standing here today, and you couldn't point a finger and accuse me of anything wrong. I ran for Congress on. I never once said during my entire campaign, QAnon. I never once said any of the things that I am being accused of today during my campaign. I never said any of these things since I have been elected for Congress. These were words of the past, and these things do not represent me. They do not represent my district, and they do not represent my values. I understand how terrible it is because when I was 16 years old in 11th grade, my school was a gun-free school zone, and one of my schoolmates brought guns to school and took our entire school hostage. And that happened right down the hall from my classroom. I know the fear that David Hogg had that day. I know the fear that these kids have. Also want to tell you 9/11 absolutely happened. I remember that day crying all day long watching it on the news. And it's a tragedy for anyone to say it didn't happen. And so that I definitely want to tell you, I do not believe that it's fake.
The punishment was meted out in a modestly bipartisan vote of 230 to 199, which occurred hours after Greene, a fierce supporter of former President Donald Trump, took to the House floor to renounce the conspiracy movement and expressed regret for spreading misinformation. 11 Republicans defied their party to join all voting Democrats in disciplining Greene, whose alarming actions before she ran for office included posting video of herself harassing a teen school shooting survivor and casting doubt on the September 11, 2001 attacks. The vote came after the chamber's top Republican Kevin McCarthy balked at punishing her over her rhetoric, with the furor over Greene exposing deep party divisions in the wake of Trump's presidency.
Meanwhile, wildfires continue to burn on the fringes of Perth, Australia's 4th largest city. West Australian fire authorities say winds are expected to strengthen overnight. Several homes have been destroyed since Thursday, taking the total of burnt-out buildings to 86, according to local media. 7 firefighters have sustained minor injuries, but no deaths have been reported in the bushfire. Scientists say fires are becoming more frequent and intense due to climate change, with people living in urban bushland areas like the Perth Hills especially vulnerable to the impact of blazes. Hundreds of people have fled the area in recent days, and emergency warnings remain in place.
As you said, we're approaching around 11,000 hectares of land.
Now in Paris, water levels exceed 4.30 meters as the Seine floods its banks. On the Pont de l'Arma bridge, the Zouave statue, an iconic but inaccurate indicator of water levels, is up to his calves in water. According to local France website, days of torrential rain has caused rivers across France to burst their banks, overflowing roads and villages, with 18 departments still on high flood alert on Thursday. France also warned of important flooding in the rest of the southwest, the north, and the northeast of the country. Orange alert means the risk of flooding is very high, potentially dangerous, and with detrimental impact on daily life for the areas concerned, and that people should be careful when leaving their home.
In other news, China accused Britain of ideological prejudice in revoking the license of Chinese state broadcaster CGTN as tensions mount between London and Beijing. Beijing hit out at the ruling, saying it was based on ideological prejudice. Let's listen in.
英国通信管理局基于意识形态偏见，以政治理由对 CGTN 在英落地传播进行打压，将技术问题政治化，严重损害中国媒体声誉，严重干扰两国间正常的人文交流。中方对此坚决反对。英方一方面标榜新闻自由，另一方面却不顾事实，对 CGTN 在英落地传播进行干扰、横加阻挠，是赤裸裸的双重标准和政治打压。中方敦促英方立即停止政治操弄，纠正错误。中方保留做出必要反应的权利，维护中国媒体的正当权益。BBC 长期以来在意识形态领域恶意的攻击抹黑中国共产党和中国政府，多次播出毫无事实依据的假新闻，严重的偏离媒体报道的客观、平衡、公正的立场。中方对此是坚决反对的。
British regulator Ofcom revoked CGTN's license on Thursday after finding that its state-backed ownership structure broke UK law. The move means UK broadcast providers must stop offering the channel to British audiences or face an unlimited fine. According to British law, broadcasters must not be controlled by political bodies. CGTN opened its European headquarters in London in 2019, but the English-language satellite broadcaster has long faced criticism for parroting the Communist Party line in its global broadcasts. CGTN blamed the manipulation of far-right groups and anti-China forces for the Ofcom ruling in a statement posted to the Twitter-like platform Weibo. In the U.S., CGTN is one of 7 Chinese media outlets that have been designated as state-sponsored actors rather than as an independent media.